All right, let's get started. So, good evening and welcome to our keynote session on Homeschool Kid to Silicon Valley Entrepreneur. My name is Kanan Stevens, and I'm a co-founder of the Liberation of Education. And I'm so pleased to be with you all tonight to introduce our esteemed speaker, Ryan Delk. So I'm especially excited to introduce Ryan because we are somewhat related. He's actually my sister-in-law's brother-in-law. Try saying that 3 times fast. Ryan was homeschooled from kindergarten through 8th grade. He spent his high school years in public school and then went on to the University of Florida. He dropped out of college with just a few classes left to graduate, but that's a story I'll let him tell. Ryan has been founding and running startups for the past 10 years. He was named to Forbes 30 Under 30 list in 2019. He's raised more than $100 million in venture capital, and he's an investor in over 50 companies. And currently, he's the founder and CEO of Primer. Primer is a place for kids to explore and discover together. Whether you're into coding or chess, drawing, or astrophysics, there's a club and a community ready for you at Primer. Even with all those accolades, he considers his greatest achievement to be his family, including his wife and their 2 children. So without further ado, please join me in warmly welcoming Ryan Delk.
Awesome. Thanks for having me, Kanan. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here. So hopefully this works. All right. Can y'all see that?
Looks good.
Awesome. Well, my name is Ryan, as Kanan shared, and it's awesome to be with you all. I love speaking at things like this. I love talking to people like this. I'm sort of obsessed with anyone who's thinking about new ideas in education, people who are trying things that may not work, things that may work, and specifically people that are just trying ambitious ideas around new ways to help kids learn, to give kids new paths. And I actually much prefer to do these in person. And so my request of all of you is that we make this as interactive as possible. So obviously I can't be in a room with all of you. We can't be sitting around, to be my preference, but we can get the closest thing to that. So I would love to have as many questions as possible at the end to be able to sort of have as close as we have as proximate to a conversation. And specifically, I would love if you ask hard questions. So there's always easy questions, which are great. I'm happy to answer those questions. But at least when I listen to people talk, I'm often thinking of questions like, I would love to ask that, but that's a little bit awkward, or maybe that would make them feel uncomfortable. I promise you won't make me feel uncomfortable. So I love the hard questions, and I'd love for you to ask as many things as you want. And hopefully we can have kind of an extended Q&A at the end. So I'm going to share a little bit about my story, a little bit about what I believe, and a little bit about what I'm working on. And my hope is to share a little bit of the framing of how I think about education, why I think alternative education is so important, how it ties in with my own story, and how I think that why I think anyone who's thinking about these things is so important, and hopefully some ways that we can all work together to build a better education system. So I wanted to start with what I believe. And I'm just going to read this word for word because I think it's so important. But I believe in a future where kids are more ambitious, more creative, and can learn to think for themselves. This is something that I actually wrote down almost 5 years ago when my wife and I got pregnant with our first kids, and I was thinking about education, which I'll talk about later on in this presentation. But I was thinking about what's broken about the current model and what could be different about the future. And these are sort of the 3 things that stuck out to me that felt like they were so important and were so lacking. And as I started to think about this more, I actually was able to kind of distill it down to something even simpler, which is that I believe in a future where we take kids seriously. And this sounds sort of maybe a little bit cliche or simplistic, but I actually think it's really powerful. And those of you who have kids or who have educated kids, you've probably seen the difference of a kid when they are in a situation where they don't feel taken seriously. They feel like they're being spoken to in a way that's condescending or pedantic. They're being talked down to. They're being underestimated. Versus a situation where they sort of come to life and they seize the day. They're excited to take responsibility. They feel like they have ownership over something. And I was struck by how many times, not just in school, but in our whole society and our whole culture, we just don't take kids seriously. And in my own life, even before I had kids, when I would interact with my nieces and nephews or my friends' kids, I would sort of go out of my way to try to take them seriously, to treat them as a human being, not just, a kid that maybe wasn't ready to have a conversation, or, I would try to be curious about their life. And I would just see how this sort of changed the way that they would interact with me. And I just got very hung up and stuck on this idea. And I started thinking about what the repercussions would be, if we, had a world where we took kids seriously. And that's sort of the idea that I've been obsessed with for about 5 years, and the idea that ultimately led to Primer. But I want to start maybe a little bit earlier than that and go back to my story, because I think it's relevant to this, and maybe will resonate with a lot of you here. And then I'll talk a little bit about Primer. So I believe this because I actually got to live it. This is actually how I felt when I was a kid. I felt like in my family and my education that I was taken seriously. And really what I mean is that I was just a really lucky kid. There's a lot of people that, you don't really control your own educational circumstances, your family circumstances. A lot of those things as a kid are kind of out of your control. And I feel like I was the luckiest kid in the world. So this is me when I was a kid, grew up in Florida. This is probably at New Smyrna Beach or Daytona Beach or something, one of our many frequent beach trips. But more important than me was actually my mom. And I want to give you a little bit of background about my mom and talk a little bit about her story and how that weaves in with my story and how that weaves into my educational story. So my mom was a public school teacher in Atlanta, and she actually wrote her thesis, or one of her papers in college when she was studying to become a teacher, on why homeschooling should be illegal, or why it was like this terrible form of education. So she was pretty pro public schools, sort of traditional education. And we moved from Atlanta down to Orlando when I was a few years old. And we didn't move into the best neighborhood or the best school district. And so she took me to kindergarten orientation or kindergarten orientation. And she was like, I can't leave you here. Like I've spent all this energy cultivating this love of learning and curiosity, and like they're going to just destroy all of that. And so she decided to sort of, despite being very pro public school, someone who was, extremely bought in, I think at that time, to the public school system, she decided to keep me home and homeschool me for what she thought would be a year. And sort of we tried to move into a better school district. My dad worked, I think, like 3 jobs so that she could stay home and homeschool me. And we would save up money and move to a better school district. Well, fast forward 16 years later, she homeschooled me and my 2 younger siblings, all kindergarten through 8th grade. And I have so much respect for her, not just for making all the sacrifices that my family did so that she could do that, but for the willingness to change her mind when she got new data and when she had an experience that she was willing to say, hey, I believed in the system, or I thought that there was some good things about the system, but based on my experience and this new data that I have, like I'm actually gonna pursue a different path. And you have to keep in mind, there's 5.5, 6 million homeschoolers in the US right now. When I was homeschooled, when she started homeschooling me, there's not great data on this, but probably 200,000 homeschoolers in the entire US. So in Florida at that time, there was probably 10 or 15,000 homeschoolers total. So it was not like homeschooling today where everyone knew about it and everyone knew people that was homeschooled. This was a very sort of like bleeding edge decision for her. And there was not a lot of infrastructure. So she actually created a ton of infrastructure for us to have these experiences. And there's 3 things about my homeschooling experience that I think were extremely impactful for me, and I feel like have carried on into how I think about education today, how I think about my own kids' education, how I think about Primer. And the first one is that anything that we basically every way they thought about our education or our progression through education was always on an extremely long time horizon. So a lot of parents and a lot of teachers think about, okay, my kid on, they're in 2nd grade, are they at a 2nd grade reading level equivalence? How's their math reading? Like, how's their math level? Like, are they sort of like lined up? My parents, they actually told us this. They said, hey, we don't care what you're like at 12 or 15. We care about what you're like at 25 or 35 or 45. And we care that you are a voracious reader who knows how to think for yourself, who's creative, who's ambitious, who's articulate, who knows how to solve problems, who's not intimidated by running after big challenges. And so they sort of like took a much more macro view on what education and learning could be. And that allowed them to be way less stressed and way less sort of micromanaging about like what individual little pieces of progress, might look like, or what our specific grade levels would be. And I don't think I realized how profound that was until I got much older. The second thing that was really amazing is everything that they could make experiential, they would make experiential. And so my mom has this amazing story about when she was first started homeschooling me, and she had I think it was like a nature biology or some sort of, basically I was learning a lesson about flowers. And she gave me the textbook, and I was looking at like the pistil and the stamen and the pollen and all this stuff. And like, I was just totally out of it. I was like, I'm not interested. Who cares? And she realized, she's like, why are we sitting at the dining room table doing this? Like, this is sort of idiotic. We have a backyard that certainly has flowers in it, and I have a knife that I could cut open a flower and show you a pistil on a stamen. So we went to the backyard, we picked some flowers, came back inside, and it was like just a total turning point in this sort of day of homeschooling. And that was sort of like a light bulb moment for her of realizing that the power of making sort of like the world your classroom, and this ability to create these immersive experiences when you're engaging in homeschooling or other forms of alternative education. And so she took this to the extreme. And so when we were learning about the American Revolution, when I was in elementary or middle school, we weren't reading textbooks. We weren't going to see a movie about the American Revolution. She put us in a minivan and we drove from Florida all the way to the Northeast. And we went to all 13 colonies, or most of them, and saw the sites of the American Revolution, walked where Paul Revere rode his horse to say the British were coming. And to this day, I am obsessed with early American history and the lives of the founding fathers, and read biographies of the founding fathers and love Hamilton. All I think, because I can trace it back to this very immersive experience that I had learning about the foundations of this country. And that was a huge sacrifice for her to do that. We didn't grow up with a ton of money. Obviously, there's a ton of time involved in that, but she was willing to make the sacrifice and make that happen. The third thing that she did, and that my parents did, that was so impactful for me and that has translated maybe the most of anything to primer and to how I think about education today, is they were willing to let us go as far as we wanted on anything that we were excited about, and even at sort of social cost to them. And so I remember I went to this co-op at a church a couple of days a week, and in middle school, or I think it was in 5th grade, and I realized that kids were going to the vending machine and they were buying sodas, during the lunch breaks. And they were paying 50 cents for, a can of Coke. And I realized I was at the grocery store with my mom, and I saw that a 12 pack of Coke was like $3. I was like, well, that's significantly less than 50 cents of Coke. And so I told my mom, hey, I want to buy some of these and put them in a cooler and bring them to school. And I want to sit next to the vending machine. And I want to basically, sort of charge like 30 or 40 cents per Coke and make a profit. And then people will buy from me, not the vending machine. She could have easily said, hey, Ryan, this is silly. You're going to make a couple bucks. Like, this isn't really worth it. She went all in. She took me to the grocery store. She helped me calculate what I needed to charge, what my profit margin was going to be, helped me pay back her when I sold the inventory. And this was just sort of like a constant theme in sort of our childhood, was anything that we got excited about, whether it was business related or school related. They sort of like, I sort of conceptualized it like a treadmill, like a virtual treadmill, where we could run as fast as we wanted and go as long as we wanted on these ideas and these things that excited us. And I think that those three things really shaped what my education was like. And I think, like most kids in the moment, I didn't really appreciate it that much. I knew it was kind of unique, but I went to a classical Christian high school. And I started to realize, okay, this is actually what I had. It was quite interesting. I really do know how to think, and I know how to have these conversations, and I know how to engage in ideas in a different way than a lot of my classmates. And I started to sort of become more and more thankful for these sacrifices and these decisions my parents made. And then I decided to go to college, because I just thought this is what you do. And so I ended up at the University of Florida. Go Gators, if there's any Gators in the audience. And I got to this huge school, 50,000 people. And very quickly, academics became not that interesting to me. So I had a couple classes that I really enjoyed on the economics side, but I was mostly involved in a lot of different student groups, and started to get involved in technology. And I spent a summer in Nairobi, Kenya, because I was trying to think what's the craziest thing I could do. And so I found a tech hub there that I could go sort of intern at and learn about technology. And through that, I met a bunch of people from San Francisco that were in the sort of startup world there. And they said, hey, you should come out to San Francisco and sort of, explore kind of working out here. If you love technology, it's sort of like the hotbed of it. And so I ended up going from University of Florida to San Francisco, and actually dropped out of college to join a startup in San Francisco. And I remember when I called my parents and said, hey, I think I'm going to drop out. I got this offer to join this startup. I was so nervous to do that. Like most kids, my parents sacrificed a lot for me to be able to go to school. They had paid for a lot of my school. I was going to drop out and not have a degree. And I don't remember exactly what my dad said, but it was something along the lines of in retrospect, you probably shouldn't have gone to college in the first place. And there's two things that stuck with me from that conversation. The first is how supportive they were, because obviously there's a lot of parents that would not have been supportive of their son just, immediately leaving and going, across the country to work, at a startup. And then secondly, how I was just the thought of not going to college never even crossed my mind. And I don't think my dad was necessarily wrong. I met my wife at college. I love UF. I'm very glad that I was there for a lot of reasons, but I think structurally the inertia that was pulling me from my high school to college was just so strong that I never even once considered that not going to college could have been an option. And then I got out to San Francisco and I started building tech companies. And I started meeting friends that didn't go to college. Some friends that didn't even go to high school or dropped out of high school. And I've spent the last 10 years building tech companies. And one of the things that I love so much about the startup world and the technology world is that it's the closest thing I think we have to like a meritocracy. And what I mean by that is that people in so many parts of sort of the corporate world, you're judged by where you went to school or how old you are, how many years of experience you have, or what your title is. And at most tech startups, you are judged by your output and how much value you can create. And I was sort of obsessed with this sort of like this sort of part of the physics of how startups worked, that you could just come in. And I came in as like a 20-year-old kid and was able to start doing deals with Fortune 500 companies and managing people that were 50% older than me and learning all these things that I would never have been able to learn anywhere else. And so I just got sort of addicted to, I think in a good way, into the leverage that you can have at a startup. And I just became obsessed with the way that that tech can change the world. And obviously, technology can be a force for evil and a force for really hard things, but it can also be a force for good. And I am a sort of unabashed technology optimist, and I believe that technology can change the world. And so I had this amazing experience building tech companies. Was more and more thankful for my mom and my dad and the sacrifices they made for our education. And then something happened, which is that I had kids. My wife and I had our first kid, Wes. And then our second kid, Audrey. And this process was, having kids is amazing for a lot of reasons. It changes your framing, how you think about life. It changes all sorts of things for you. But the thing that was really interesting for me is in San Francisco, like there's a lot of, like parents have a lot of sort of, anxiety and just a lot of planning goes into education. Oftentimes you get on a waiting list for a private school, years before, your kid's ever going to go there. And so we naturally, like our friends, when you get pregnant, you sort of start thinking about education. And I realized that there was literally nothing really interesting in San Francisco that I was excited about sending my kids to. If you've been following anything about San Francisco news, the public school system here is a total disaster. And the private schools are extremely expensive and just very rigid in a lot of cases. And so I started searching for startups or for tech companies that had solved this. And I figured, hey, it was 20 something years ago when I was homeschooled. Surely someone has just productized that experience and basically made that available to other kids. And I was stunned that didn't exist. And so that was basically the moment that I thought of what would become Primer. And so I realized that there was an opportunity to build something that could enable that for millions and millions of kids around the world. And so Primer, for me, is really the embodiment of this belief in a future where kids can be more ambitious, more creative, and learn to think for themselves. And that's what we want to create at Primer. And if you ever come to the Primer office in San Francisco, anyone's welcome to come by. You'll see this neon sign on our wall. And every single day when we come in, I turn it on. When I come in, we turn it off when we leave the office. And it's a constant reminder to us about the importance and the power in the idea of taking kids seriously. And so Primer, our sort of long-term vision is that we can build a new education system, not just for the US, but for the world. And we believe that the single highest leverage thing that you can do is to fix education, because all of the world's problems are downstream of education, regardless of what you're passionate about, whether it's climate change or whether it's politics or whether it's curing cancer, or figuring out how to desalinate salt water to solve water shortages, or whether it's figuring out nuclear fission, whatever it is, it's all downstream of education. And I believe that the best way for us to deploy our energy and our time and our resources is to go after the biggest possible problem. And I believe education is that huge problem. And so Primer today is two things. It's a series of interest-based clubs for kids, where kids can go deep on anything that they're excited about, whether it's art or science or writing. And they can find other kids around the world who are in these clubs that are all virtual, they're all online. They can collaborate, they can do work together, they can share ideas, they can get feedback. And the idea is that when you give kids in this environment, that where they find other kids who actually want to earnestly engage and work in deep work and true work, that magic things happen. And kids feel taken seriously on Primer, and so they show up differently. There's very little of the typical school issues like bullying or any of those kind of things happen on Primer, because when people come to Primer, they realize it's a different space. The second thing that Primer is as of about 12 hours ago, this morning, we announced Primer Micro Schools. And so this is our first step towards actually replacing the full K through 12 education system. And so we're launching Primer Micro Schools in Florida, starting in Miami this school year, which are going to be basically taking the Primer ethos of education and translating it into an actual K through 12, starting with 3rd through 6th grade experience, full day replacement in person for families that want to have an alternative option for their kids. And so I hope that I can work on this problem for a very, very long time. I would love to work on this for the next 30, 40 years. And my goal is at that point that we can be in a position where we've built this future together, where kids do have the opportunity to have an education that unlocks their natural curiosity and ambition and creativity. And it's just super inspiring to spend time with people like you all that are here today, that care about these things, that are engaging in these ideas, that are asking the hard questions. And so I always love spending time with people that are thinking about this. And I'm just super excited to build this future together. So I would love to have a lively Q&A now for anyone that has questions. I'm happy to dive into anything. No topic is off limits.
Right, that was awesome. Michael's asking, can you say more about how exactly the micro school version works?
Sure thing. Yeah, let me just stop sharing my screen here. Yeah, so Primer Micro Schools. So there's two components to it. So the first is there's an actual teacher in person in a micro school environment, and so it's between 15 and 30 kids. And the interesting thing about this model is we're unbundling the academic progress from the importance of sort of the traditional relationships and projects and things that kids want to spend their time on. And so the in-person teacher, you can think of them almost like a quarterback of the kids' experience. So they're not in charge of any academic progress. They're just in charge of creating the best environment possible for kids to do whatever they want, to go as deep as possible in anything they're excited about. And sort of paired with that, we have a series of world-class virtual teachers that are like, you can think of them as sort of like the sort of ideal as like the best 5th grade math teacher in the world. And we're building tools. We've already built tools for kids to have these collaborative online experiences where they do these live interactions and take classes all in Primer. And it's much better than Zoom or sort of traditional virtual classes. And so these virtual teachers will be responsible for the sort of academic progress of the kid. But much like homeschoolers, anyone who's homeschooled knows, you can sort of accomplish a lot of the academic progress that kids need to or want to make in a very short amount of time. And so for 2 to 3 hours a day, kids can sort of knock out the core academics that are required by the state or by whoever, and actually that we think will be presented in a way that'll be really exciting and engaging to them. And then the rest of the day, they can just go deep on whatever they want. And so the teacher that's there on site is in charge of helping them make a hip hop beat and figure out how to write a rap song over that beat, or research a biology project. And the cool thing is they have Primer clubs to be a part of, where they have this global community that are interested in the same things they are. And so one of the things that's really challenging about micro schools is or homeschool co-ops is you might only have 10 or 15 kids. And so if you're really interested in 15th century French literature or studying the microbiome of cows, the chances of you having another kid that's actually interested in that same thing is extremely low. But there's definitely kids that are interested in those things on Primer. And so the Primer sort of virtual club network will allow kids to find sort of their tribe and find kids that are also interested in the same things they are, so they can go really deep on those things with them. And so it'll give them sort of the hybrid of both like sort of core academics and these sort of interest-based experiences. And then really importantly, it'll allow them to progress at whatever pace they want. And so I believe that a 3rd grader should be able to take 6th grade math if they're ready for it. And this model will let that happen.
That's so cool. Jessica's asking, how do you feel about the transition to a tech-based homeschool learning versus what you experienced?
Good question. I said this at the beginnings. I'm biased, but I'm a techno optimist. I believe that technology is a force for good, and so I believe that there's a lot of power and value in face-to-face, in-person interactions, and those are extremely important. And I also believe that technology can be something that creates amazing experiences. And so in our case, we believe that the in-person, like physical interactions, are really important in micro schools, but a top 1% or top 0.1% physics teacher is not like half as good, or sorry, it's not like twice as good as a median physics teacher. They're more like 10x as good as a median physics teacher. And so if you're a kid and you're really excited about physics, getting access to that top 1% physics teacher, even if it's virtual, which is slightly worse than in person, is way better than just having the median physics teacher that happens to be available in Miami-Dade County at your school. And so that's an example where getting kids connected with someone who can actually teach them a subject that they're excited about on a very deep level is much better through technology than through sort of a traditional sort of brick and mortar world. I think that the biggest challenge actually is most parents and kids that we talk to sort of don't they like technology. Like it's very difficult to have kids do deep work through technology, and so that's a lot of the challenge that we have. And what we're focused on when we build products is how do we create environments where kids can actually use technology to go deep and not just like be on TikTok or have these really short attention spans, but actually do deep, earnest, exciting work on the internet. And so we spend a lot of time trying to build environments that can create that focus, which I think is much harder for them than it was for me.
That's awesome. We're getting lots of questions over here. So my mom, she's a huge fan of yours. She said, will your micro school be brick and mortar or face to face?
Yeah, it'll be brick and mortar. There'll be some of them will be in like churches or existing buildings. Some of them will actually lease commercial spaces for. Some of them will be in community centers. It kind of depends on what each neighborhood or families, group of families wants. But yeah, it'll be a traditional, like kids can come, parents can still go to work. You don't have to be, you don't have to take, one parent doesn't have to stay home, which I think is the biggest sort of structural barrier to alternative education today is one parent has to stay home. And if you're a single parent or dual income family, there's all these reasons why that can't happen. And so we want to break down that barrier.
And why'd you choose Miami? I'm just curious.
So we actually sort of there's someone that was working on a micro schools company in Miami, and we met him and sort of convinced him to do it inside a primer instead of going solo. And so Florida is also just an extremely friendly state from a school choice perspective. And so we've it's not public yet, but we've done a lot of deals with the government and with Ron DeSantis' office and some different people that are going to make it very affordable to a lot of families or even free for a lot of families. And so that's one of the reasons we started in Florida.
Very cool. So Jessica's asking, is Primer a platform that would be helpful for kids that also attend public school to get deep dives into subjects that they're interested in?
Yeah, what's interesting is we started geared mostly towards homeschoolers, and within like maybe 6 months or 7 months, more than half of our users went to traditional school. And mostly public school. So it totally is. It ends up being quite frustrating for those kids because they can only be on like after school hours on the weekend. And so their friends are all like making progress on their projects all day. And then they like log on at 3 p.m. But I think it's way better than the alternative of not being involved, I think. So yeah, we have a ton of kids that are in public school, private school, go to traditional schools, and Primer is like their outlet to go deep on stuff.
That's so cool. And Laura said, since I already run a micro school, can I subscribe to Primer for student use?
Yeah, we have several schools that do that, and then we're working on some functionality that will allow like each individual school to have like their own sort of space that's like just the school. So the students that want to, so for example, we're launching a science fair, which is going to be this amazing like tournament for science that's going to run every single month. And so in a school context, like we want to make it so that kids that are like in a group could have sort of a shared space. So everyone at a single micro school, whether it's a Primer micro school or someone else's micro school, can have like their community, and they can also be part of the broader like science tournament, but they have kind of like their space to collaborate and stuff too.
Yeah, I love that. How many students do you have subscribed to Primer right now?
We have a couple thousand families on the online only version. And then we just announced micro schools 11 and a half hours ago. And we have
the blog,
yeah, we have three full schools right now. And then we're going to try to launch. We need to do a lot of work to get this ready, but we're going to try to get 7 more before August.
Oh my word. That's amazing. 7 more in Miami or throughout?
Yeah, 7 more in Miami.
Wow, that's incredible, Ryan. And I'm assuming you want to expand to the whole United States.
Yeah, so we want to make this model work. And then if you don't live in Miami, which I'm guessing most of these people on the call don't, my goal is to go from 10 schools this year to 100 schools next year. And then go to 500 schools the year after that. So we'll probably expand primarily in Florida this year and next year. And then West Virginia, Arizona, Texas, Colorado, a lot of other states will come after that as long as we can make this work. So.
And I'm assuming you're hiring teachers and...
Yes, we're hiring world-class virtual teachers for specific subjects. You can go to primer.com/careers. We're also hiring in-person teachers in Miami for micro schools. We pay significantly more than what you're making in your current role if you're a teacher. And then I am at Delk on Twitter, or Ryan@withprimer.com. You can reach out to me anytime, and I'm always happy to chat and connect.
That's incredible, man. I wish we were in a big room together, like to be able to cheer, but I'm so excited that you've been here to share with us and to let more people know about Primer. I think it's a fabulous product. Very,
Well,
very
thanks for having me,
cool.
Keenan. It's great to be here.
Yeah, this was awesome. All right, well, I think we're finished out. If there's any more questions, let me check the Q&A. I think we've answered all the questions, but again, this was amazing. This will be available recording for anybody else. And yeah, I look forward to seeing all your success. Congratulations.
Awesome.
Ryan.
Thanks so much, everyone.